Musimy już zaczynać nasz stream. Prosiłbym o sprawdzenie mikrofonu, który tam pozostawiłem.
Raz, tak? Wszystko działa?
Tak.
Słuchajcie, witam was na
Hello, I would like to welcome you.
generała. Będzie super ciekawy wykład.
It will be a very interesting lecture. We've already hosted General Bieniek 4 years ago, and that was a fantastic experience because he was able to say about something that we as artists realize very rarely. The big discrepancy between what is written and what happens, what is created in our heads when we try to reflect the reality of the war in the films.
Dopiero jestem teraz online? Aha. Generał Mieczysław Mieniek, profesor.
General Mieczysław Bieniek, professor, educated in English, Polish, American universities. He was vice head of NATO. He was serving in all Polish missions that you could imagine: Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq. A great sportsman, a fantastic friend, an incredible windsurfer, kite surfer, anything that you can imagine, and a great storyteller. Good evening. Thank you for this dynamic presentation of my person, but I didn't deserve so much. Well, it's good to know you. Of course, it's better to have more people than those who are sitting in the room. I'm alone, so you have advantage over me. I will try to start my story. Maybe not like a professor who will be telling a story. I'll tell you about life, about true things that are as they are and not as we would expect them to be. The title of my presentation is The Situation of International Security, War and its dire face, and reality versus its screening. It's a very important and serious topic, especially that behind our eastern border we have a huge, horrible, bloody battle not for the freedom of Ukraine, but also the values that we as the Western society are guided by. The barbarity of Russian hordes is who work exactly totally against the rules of law. They want to subdue another nationality. Seeing you here, knowing the sensitivity of some of you, I would like to present these things in a way that is hopefully regulated, but maybe not so horrible. Security, in the meaning of widely understood, is not something that is given forever. It's like love. It's like flower that you have to water, that you have to take care of it, you have to nurture it, to upkeep it. It's not given once and for all. We thought that its strategic pause after the fall of the Berlin Wall, after the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, after entering of countries into the NATO and EU, we thought it's the end of history. It would be nice. It would be nice, and everybody said. Some people say that we were supposed to be healthy, beautiful, and rich, which I also would want to achieve, but it's not, unfortunately, the true. Wars, my dears, are black holes in the history of humanities. The wars from the very outset of the beginning of this world have been. I mean, they're connected with our human nature. But of course, there are many different causes for the war, but politics play a special role, especially in the times of globalization. Do wars make sense? Do they change anything? Do they improve anything? Well, not really. They only bring pain, ruin, and unhappiness, and something that we have to rebuild. Something that sometimes cannot be retrieved. In the role of today's information revolution, with the wide access to media, to everything, including social media, we can get to the most tragic events in real time. And based on that, many people, especially young people, who to whom this more intensive image do not reach, they create an image of reality, but they don't look for the sources of evil. That's why you, people of high sensitivity, that's why directors, writers, script writers, you have the chance to use your camera, your imagination, to reach the audience, the society, which will show us where this reality can appear. I wanted to say a bit more about security. If we look at that, I will use the words of Socrates, who would say that strategy is the blessing of the gods, because it allows you use the power of mind to give us happiness. Everything that we do in life has to build on certain rationality. It's called strategy. I allowed myself here to show on this slide what the strategy looks like in the very general strategy. The core of it all, it's leadership. Then we have the core of the system, whether it's theocratic, theological, or political. It's the core of the system. Then we have the infrastructure, whatever a given country has. So all kinds of resources, like mineral resources, but bridges, roads, whatever is infrastructure. And another circle is the population, because the population of Albania, Lithuania, Estonia, and the population of Ukraine is almost like 40 million, is very important. And the external part is the defense mechanism. The whole system, economic system, diplomatic system, resources, administration, all that, which is the system of defense. Now, the most susceptible to a conventional attack is the defense mechanism, because every country has the obligation to strengthen the defense mechanism. However, leadership is the most important part out of that all. What would happen if after the 24th of February this year, Zelensky would use the proposal of President Biden and other leaders, and he would leave Kiev and leave this nation and would lead from another nation, from another country in exile? By his example, he showed that he can be like a film. He's a film-like leader. He's a leader of the country. He suddenly became president. He was a comedian who then won against Poroshenko with his charisma. However, with his charisma and pulling behind him not only politicians but the people, with his courage, with his goodness as a human being, but also the capabilities and acting capability. Look how he was talking to the parliament, to the German parliament, to the Bundeswehr. How he spoke to the Chamber of Representatives, to the representative, how he spoke to Knesset, how he spoke to the Japanese emperor. In all his gestures, he got sympathy and support, and this is what leadership is about. It is extremely important. Just like with Knesset, I remembered the late Elizabeth II. As you know, Shimon Peres was the president of Israel, and he entered Knesset. He had like his shirt unbuttoned, and the head of Knesset said, "Mr. Peres, this is Knesset. How are you dressed?" And I'm sorry, I had the agreement from, I have a consent from the British Queen. I went to Buckingham Palace 2 weeks ago, and he said, like this, you can go to Knesset. So this is all about leadership. And ladies and gentlemen, talking about these wars, as I said, the nature of war is the nature of humans. Indirectly, it is caused by humans. Directly, it is caused by people, by politics. Since the contract over signed 2015, 2004, 18, the Venice Congress 1914, 1918 was called the dancing contract, which was organized after all the revolution, the French Revolution. You know, in the beginning of the 18th century, after the Napoleonic Wars, the heads of state of European of European empires decided about the new order of Europe. It was called a dancing. It was called a dancing Congress, and Alexander II, who spoke many languages and he danced very well. The Prussia was represented, France, England, because there was no Great Britain, there was England, and they made a certain alliance. And since 1815 until 1914, there were no wars. I mean, there were some small local battles for fighting of the for the unity of Germany, but the First World War is a sea of dead bodies. It's a entrenched war. It's the willingness to dominate of one empires over other empires. It is something that was not good for anyone. However, as I said, because the wars don't, I said that the wars don't bring anything good. But in 1918, as the result of the Versailles Treaty, our country appeared after 123 years of occupation. And just imagine that over those 20 years of the interwar period, how many things were done. And this is also recorded on film, on the film. It's so good to watch those chronicles. And we had that. We didn't have the iPhones, iPads. We didn't have the interhuman communication. We didn't have all this force of message of transmission, but we've managed to collate together this country of three occupied territories by leadership of such people like Piłsudski, who of course wasn't without fault, because I mean he wasn't without a blemish, because he also then caused the revolution which abolished our parliament. General Haller, for example, who came from Austrian occupied area, who Piłsudski, the general at that time, he brought people from the German area. General Rozwadowski, the creator of the plan of repelling Russians from the Vistula River battle. But they managed. If it were to happen today, Macierewicz would be checking up on them even now, and nothing would happen. We've managed to build the port in Gdynia, the harbor in Gdynia. It was all leadership. So it was something good that could come out of this chaos. 20 years passed, 21 actually, and in that time, two most horrible regimes were born. The fascist regime and communist regime. Just even before the start of the Second World War, there were like the economic crisis, the downfall of the New Wall Street exchange. These were all harbingers which created a certain monster, which was fascism. But the USSR had a different situation, starting from Lenin through Stalinism. 18 million people died in the USSR even before the war, because of the cleansing, because of the hunger, starvation, etc. And the war brought like millions and millions of dead, uncountable wounded and homeless. That is horrible. What counts during the war? Is it a life, family, method to survive? It's the hope. The hope dies as the last. The hope that the war will end, and there will be peace. Global problems. Talking about something which we encounter. You are certainly people, educated people. You watch that live every day. I made a classification here. The threat of the proliferation of the nuclear NBC weapons. In the world, there are almost 15,000 of nuclear missiles and missiles and warheads all around the world. They are like they can be shot from the with missiles from they can be shot from submarines as well as airplanes. The missiles can be conventional, but they can also be equipped with nuclear warheads. It's horrible what I'm saying, but it is very important. Why? Because for the last 7 months, Putin is threatening us with the use of tactical weapons. My dears, the 15 and 17 kilotons of nuclear weapons destroyed Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And what should we do with that? Uncontrolled migration as the element of the war. We observed that not a long time ago, when Belarus was sending en masse groups of people as element of hybrid war. Of course, those people who got to Europe from North Africa, I think, Sławek, you had the chance to observe that or those who went through Turkey from the areas covered by war. Of course, there was some emigration, economic immigration, but people were running away from countries which are engulfed in the war. But Lukashenko used that moment to send these people en masse, because not all of them were running away from the war. But then his people were moved back they were sent back to Minsk, and he was left with them in his own country. So internal conflicts and hybrid wars, the elements of the hybrid war, the hybrid is something is made out of many elements. This is not only diverse in fake news, sabotage, using migrants as a weapon to destabilize the system and economic, supporting political parties. We have examples like Vox, the Vox party, and Orban's party is supported by enemies of enemies of our state. Terrorism and cyber terrorism. 11th September 2001 showed us what does it mean, what terrorism means. Cyber terrorism. I also believe that today we have something that has no borders. We have airspace, land space. We have the outer space. They are defined in a certain. We have legal acts which tell us how we can act in those spaces. But something that doesn't know border is the cyberspace. It belongs to us all, to all of us who have sources. Cyber terrorism and cyber security does not know any borders. Tyrannies, dictatorships, and Islam fundamentalism. I saw that in Afghanistan and Iraq. You can win any war, but the question is what next? Every empty space have to be filled with something. Will they be filled by Osama bin Laden, al-Zarqawi, or bin Laden? Those who want to change the political system in a country must know how to end the conflict. Every war has a military and political and state. Each of those wars which were made during the 20th and 21st century, in Iraq, in Liban, and other places, did not have its defined end. Rich north against poor south. People are looking for safe haven from south to north, from east to west. So if today anything happened in Russia, in Russian Federation, if something fell there, if internal destructive movements like Dagestan, Ingushetia, Chechnya, if something happened there, Armenia, Azerbaijan, all that got free from the rule of the Independent States Association, if all that moved, the situation would be extremely dangerous, because civil war would cause a great movement of migration. Everybody would be running away to the west through the countries of the western countries in our country. So we have followed that movement over certain, like G20, 27 summit, NATO summit, and some ecological movements. The social crisis that we're observing, the values and economic crisis. This is a finance which is crisis which is caused by the fact that the politicians or the leaders of countries are far away from what's happening among the population. We have so many populous countries. We've observed that in the United States that people who are running a campaign, they promise everything. We should have Ministry of Health, Happiness, and all the luck for everybody. But I will not give you a bad mood in the evening because we are all quite tired today. It's good that nobody fell asleep yet. I'm very happy with that. And of course, demographic problems, ecological problems, energy problems, and resource problems. Energy resources, gas, oil, solar power, wind power going to transferring to nuclear power. These are the questions about which we are discussing. At some point, I've been lecturing about energy security in my university, but I asked. It was 6 years ago. Who believes global warming? And can you imagine? There were like 40 people. They were like half and half. Today, if I were asked about that, everybody will believe that global warming is, because what we can see in the atmosphere is caused by this huge amount of energy that is emitted in the form of CO2 to the atmosphere. Those 50% would say no, and then I allowed myself. I wouldn't allow myself in the University of Washington. I asked, so listen, you're young. I remember representation of France in 1960, or the only white. Now they're only black. That wasn't okay, but for some it was a good hint. And totalitarian regimes and autocratic governments. These are the global problems, and to this we added Russia and its autocratic rule. Russia would never be considered a terrorist state, but the Russian regime can be considered a terrorist regime. It terrorizes an innocent nation, but also terrorizes half of the world with other things. You can see these are the regions of conflicts and regions with high risk. So you can see that the world is such that it's much weirder than Czesław Niemen paid in 1968. I don't think you remember that, when he was singing this beautiful song, This World is Strange. This world is even stranger today. It's much more dangerous. 11th of September changed everything. We went from stagnation to the global war against terrorism. But this war against terrorism didn't bring us much good. It destroyed a very fragile balance between the world of Christians and the Muslims, between the East and the West. In reality, building this big fourth caliphate was announced only after this global war against terrorism. So personality and leadership as elements of stability and the security of the state. Churchill said he was drinking a lot of whiskey, he was smoking cigars, and he got to 88 with a very good brain. And he was, when darkness of fascism came over Europe, when just Great Britain on the European continent it was the only country to defend themselves, he promised, like in the famous song, blood, sweat and tears. And exactly, he kept his promise. His leadership led to convincing the US, the Roosevelt personally, that America should join the war, even though Japanese were helped them on the 6th December 1941, when unfortunately they attacked Pearl Harbor. And everything depends on leadership. This guy was Eisenhower. During the Second World War, he led the coalition of Allied forces in Normandy. I mean, this cost like 2.5 million. There were 2.5 million fighting in the West. He showed a lot of talent. He managed an army of 13 nations. He had a charisma. He managed to do it. He succeeded. He managed to diffuse and all the problems. On the 6th of June, all this operation started. They freed Paris, Normandy, and suddenly in December 1944, on the 23rd of December, they got stuck in Ardennes. Do you remember the film? The films? It's one of the better images of the company which can turn from success into defeat. And suddenly, they got mired in Ardennes. Every week, Roosevelt had a discussion with his commander-in-chief, Eisenhower, called Ike, and he asked,
How about situation on the Western Front? To Ike jednym słowem. Sir, snafu. What does mean snafu? Situation normal, all is fuck up. I to właśnie weszło do kanonu.
that became that entered a military dictionary. We see Biden, who was he wasn't able to get on the plane, but now it occurs he's quite a rough leader. He united NATO. He put a stop to Putin's military ambitions. He managed to, of course, I mean, Democrats and Republicans do not love each other, but he managed to make something which seemed impossible. And until today, the support of the United States towards what's happening in Europe is very strong. We can see Zelensky, about whom I spoke a moment ago. We see our leaders, Czarnecki, Piłsudski, and we need General Patton, who, of course, who was famous for his controversial actions. He, for example, smacked in the face the soldiers who were in a hospital. He said that one he's too nervous to fight on, and he was the first time of PTSD. But Patton was before in the cemetery where he's to visit his dead soldiers. But he was famous for saying, "You're not here to get killed for the homeland. You're here for kill your enemies for your homeland." And I actually like that very much. Ladies and gentlemen, in many images that we see, in many battleistic scenes, which are sort of showing the imagination of the creators, we see their ego, we see the leaders, we see the operations and planning. Einstein said once that ego is one divided by knowledge. The lesser knowledge you have, the bigger ego you have. But we observe that also among other politicians. Some during those debates or their presentations, they cover the whole room with their ego. It's very difficult to listen to them. That's why representing all sorts of things in the movies and films, they look very nice. The war takes place not only between nations, but it also takes place between people, sometimes against their will. Fog of war, that's why I call it. Some images are shown in a different light. As a battle commander, I must tell you that in the operations where I took part in Iraq or in Afghanistan, I had the situation that the first report from the battlefield was bad. Then you had to verify, not to cause a cascade of other events that could cause something that could turn into a disaster, or would have results which could not be born. I mean, in many films that we see and books that we're reading, we see the image of a very beautiful war. Of course, there are dead bodies there. They're wounded, they're killed, and there are some really sad pictures. However, at the end of the day, we see that everything worked well. We go home, and those who didn't come back home, they get medals. Their families get medals, and they go into the annals of the books as heroes to whom we build memorials. I've seen many such movies, and some of them I even liked. However, what I observed for several years, right? I've been observing several years now, is showing the reality, the military reality. More and more, we see images with a different approach. There are more and more of them. They show, and now I tip my hat to you. They show the realism of the battlefield. You manage to get into the shoes of those who are there, who take decisions there, and have losses there. I have to list a number of movies I saw. There's one guy who's responsible for that film. Is Black Hawk Down, and it's very close to me because it talks about the special forces, about realism of the battlefield, which is shown in that film. The Longest Day I've mentioned, the D-Day landing of the allied forces in Normandy. The Apocalypse Now, even though the match colonel who was leading a unit, who he was leading to death, and of course the Hard Locker. Yeah, fighting with the sappers, with the against the with the traps, booby traps. You know that as a coalition we had 100-200,000 dollars for the head of al-Zarqawi and bin Laden, but they had prices for the heads of decisions, of divisions. For example, my head was costed $500,000 for a sniper, who was a gunner, who was sitting and was the first target to kill by the local fighters. It was $30,000. For the sapper, it was $100,000 because he was the most precious guy who would defuse mines, booby traps, improvised explosive devices. Crimson Tide. There's not the title I have to talk about. I don't know if you remember Gene Hackman as the head of the commander of the of a submarine. Denzel Washington was his deputy. An atomic submarine was patrolling. Nuclear submarine was patrolling the ocean. It lost connection with its base. It's a moral imperative, and suddenly they heard that the America was the territory of America was attacked. They didn't know if it's an alarm, and Gene Hackman, who's ruthless, started to told that they have to shoot the nuclear missiles. Denzel Washington said no until we check the connection. It was like a psychological battle between them, and also the moral imperative, which said that before we ruin half of the world, let's check it. And here we get to tactical missiles or strategic missiles and the method of launching them. It's not like the president of Russia or of the US. They started by pressing the button. There's a whole system of command, chain of command and security. They have all people around them. I will tell you how it works in the United States because I've been in such a center and know how it works. At the end of the day, even the most perfect plan cannot resist the actions of the enemy. And in the United States, those levels of command at the end of this chain of command, these nuclear weapons might not be used. When Sergei Pavlov, for example, 1985, he was in the center of command under Moscow. He was responsible for Russian nuclear weapons, and the new system, ELCO, was being tested. And for detecting ballistic methods, he saw 8 ballistic rockets coming from the United States. They're already over Iceland. In 12 minutes, they will reach targets in the USSR. He did not tell his superiors. He waited for verification because the system was not perfect, and it occurred that these were storks. He did not start the system. Of course, then he was penalized. He was degraded. He became a civilian, and he became the hero of the West. He got a lot of awards. It's good that he was not beheaded, but situations like that happen. So a random use of nuclear weapons is also possible. Since 1962 until 1985, 6 atomic bombs were lost. 2 were not found so far. One is lying in the Biscay, at the bottom of the Biscay, of the Bay of Biscay, where 2 bombers collided. This mechanism is being shown in the film. The nature of the war, as I said, is the nature of humans. The paradigm of this war does not change. The war is always a very vicious act, subduing another nation, another peoples with the violence. But the methods of conducting the war are unchanging. Resistance, attack, surprise, concentration of forces and chaos, resulting chaos, but also cyber security also change. There are things that change. Artificial intelligence, cyber security. What else can we add to that? The truth is that today we have so many forces and resources and possibilities. We can attack our enemy with precision hits to break his resistance. You do not need the methods that are used by Putin today, terrorizing people. He uses the tactic of General Dochet. It was an Italian. He was an Italian general who came up with an idea of terrorizing local populace to break the resistance of the nation. But today it's not necessary, and especially that. But the Russian missiles are not precise enough. Of course, there are also anti-missile. There's anti-missile ammunition, which is quite effective morally. You show the psychology of young people. This is an incredible element of all military activity. Military, not an untrained military, but without morale, is a useless army. We can see today how huge morale is on the Ukrainian side. They fight, of course, for the homeland. Here you have an example of my wounded soldiers during the operation in Iraq, where they got ambushed. They all went after 3 weeks. They came back to service. Apart from the guy with the hand. Right now, the wounded people die in Russia. There is no security. There is no medical evacuation that would secure life functions. It's in the Second World War they had 60%. Right now it's 20%. You can see to what extent Russian Federation prepared their commanders, their medicines, their logistics. So war shows here its ugly face, and also you can see that in the movies. If this happened, what you see in this map, we will not meet today here. It's a plan of operation of attack of the Warsaw Pact from the 1980s. Mass attacks of aircrafts and tanks preceded by the nuclear attacks. We were supposed to take over Jutland, north of Belgium, France, and south and the North Italy. After 14 days of operation, the Red Army was supposed to enter the Bay of Biscay. Of course, nuclear hits were planned by both parties. Why do you do training? You simulate how you carry out the operations. You ask me, Sławek, how does it happen that during the operation in Ukraine, the Russians do not use parachuters? They use the parachuters once. The paratroops ones. In these fronts, there were millions on both sides. In the Western Europe, there was about 1.5 million of soldiers out of which 750,000 were Americans, and they still could create a certain like a transfer bridge where there was equipment in British, German bases. All those who lived in Germany, how saturated they were. From Mannheim, Karlsruhe, from the Valley of Fulda, you had equipment all there. So the soldier would come, he would take the equipment and enter combat. Here the mass use of military force is excluded. Although what we observe on the Eastern Front right now in the Ukraine, the Ukrainians have engaged in war 250,000 people, Russians the same. this Russian force can grow over the winter to almost 1 million fighting on both sides together. So Russians entered by marching columns from the north and to strike forces from the east. They thought it's going to be a Sunday stroll in the park because the FSB convinced Putin that it's going to work like that. They thought that Ukrainians will run away and Zelensky will emigrate, but it didn't work. But it wasn't much that they were not far away from the victory. The columns were 40 kilometers from Kyiv. They were coming from the north, from the territory of Belarus. They were stopped because they went along two routes, one motorway. You know, there was a thaw, and they were driving along the road, and they were stopped by a very precise javelin fire. In the second week of operation, they made a landing. They made a paralanding in Hostomel airport. The task. This was the one. This was the airport where the biggest, when the Antius 28 was destroyed, the biggest aircraft in the world. So they were to secure the Hostomel airport. This airport is located only 20 minutes from Kyiv, just like Balice maybe from Krakow. If that succeeded, Kyiv as the headquarters could be taken over, and Zelensky could be killed. Ukrainians were not prepared. It didn't happen. Why? It didn't succeed. Why? Because there was supposed to be an element of surprise when the helicopters were flying in the morning, and they were photographed by the population who sent the information to the soldiers, even though Ukrainians were not even there. Ukrainians quickly moved 3 batteries of their artillery, Grad. They didn't have the HIMARS at that place. Grad are like Katyushas, but a bit more modern. When only the paratroopers landed, there was no surprise. They took over the airport, but they stayed in the airport, and they were killed by the artillery fire. Plus, there was a Kadyrov team, Kadyrov mercenary team, and they were absolutely destroyed. But also destroyed their own. The Ukrainians destroyed their own airstrips, but that was also on purpose, not to allow for landing. So there was no reconnaissance. There was no surprise. There were no support from aircrafts. So again, they showed how not to lead an operation, how not to lead reconnaissance. Here I'm showing on this slide. I'm showing to you what was the first idea. You can see 3 groups: 1 from the north, 2 from the east, and 1 from the south. This is a map which I sent to the map of strategic studies in Washington on the 20th of February. That was my assumed. I mean, that was how I expect that. I felt that there will be a hit from the west and from the south, but I never thought that it will also allow themselves for the attack from the north. What were the goals? You can see that, and how this was developed. If somebody want to do something, you have to have the center of gravity. You have to have priorities. You have to have main strike direction. If you have 8 directions, you know, the army had 180 people attacked army which had 190,000. Always the attacker should be 3-1 against the defender, and here it was less than 1-1, and it was dispersed. Nobody knew who's the commander of all that. There was no single command. General Gerasimov, who was the head of this plan, he said he said that he was not the head of this. So it seems that Putin was the direct commander. We know from the history that Hitler was the head NSDAP, the Chancellor of Germany, the Commander-in-Chief of all military forces. He was the head of Eastern Front, Western Front, and he even managed the individual groups. And we know how it all ended. The same as when I was asked once, were there attempts to assassinate Putin? I have no such information, but let me remind you that there were 20 attempts to kill Hitler, and he committed suicide just after he got married. So this was badly planned. Logistics, reconnaissance were hopeless. Do you know that 7 very big Russian generals were killed there? The 14 colonels were killed. They were directly on the battlefield, and their headquarters were very easy to reveal, to discover, because satellites managed to collect all the information. They sent it to the batteries of artillery, and they would aim and kill the whole headquarters and commanding centers. At some point, I said that the most difficult job, the difficult in the world, is the Russian general and the Polish accountant after Polski Ład, after the Polish deal, and this is the equipment that the Russians are losing. In general, we have the 8th month of combat, and some people estimate that they do up to 80 billion dollars in equipment and 60,000 in people. You have to pay damages to the families. You have to treat the wounded. You have to feed the people. You have to support ammunition, supply ammunition, the fuel, food. These are all huge costs. If on top of that you have such things as sanctions, which are put on Russia, they say they have unlimited resources. No, sanction is like a nail in your shoe. After a day you can survive, but after 3 months it's unbearable. And also the materials where they produce their, the problem is that they also sourced a lot of things from the outside, and you cannot get the electronics and other things for building modern equipment. Then you have a pile of trash instead of tanks. Artillery, for example, the classical artillery, howitzers, guns, the barrel can shoot 40 to 60 pieces of ammunition. Then it's decalibrated. In order to make a new barrel, you need to make a cast, and if you would have to make a cast, you need to have a good steel. Russia has almost all minerals, but they cannot do certain things. I also proposed once, because I have a seminar group, and I observing certain thesis, but one of the titles made me laugh, and I said, dear lady, can you write something from literature, from history? But we're in the we're in the security. Yes, they have the whole everything at their disposal, and they cannot build such equipment. The military command will not be able to rebuild itself for 15 years to hold the war. Russia is so big, and Russia has 1,250,000 soldiers, and they only had 280,000 in ground forces, 190. So 250 of those soldiers have been already employed in this operation, out of which 60,000 died. The next 60,000 is wounded. So this is irreparable. They had to make mobilization. This mobilization have to be well made. They have to be also equipped into something. If they now get the equipment, they refresh the equipment from 1960s, from 1970s, and for example, you have T-72, and they also lack certain equipment. They do not have electronic equipment. They do not have everything is either stolen or or destroyed. One of the heads of tank divisions shot himself when he saw that out of 60 tanks that he has in his magazine, 20 or it can only be used. So these are also things like corruption, things which support this support Ukraine in the war of Russia. There was a film, Sergeant Bilko, making like ridiculing the army and its administration and corruption. I was talking about the battlefield management systems. It is nicely shown in films, for example, in special operations when Osama bin Laden would his people watch at the screen as they're killing where Barack Obama is watching as Osama bin Laden is killed. This is reconnaissance and target pointing, aiming in real time. This is all the information is transferred to ground terminals in real time. Today, technology allows for that. But the effective command control communication have to be operated by the right people. At the end of this whole chain is always a human being and his attention. And I wanted to tell you about one more thing. It's all fine. We make decisions. We make quick decisions. We have missiles which reach the target. We complete the mission. No, in every process, in every system, there is a decision process. First, you have to. I've been telling this story for quite a long, but it's very different in the dynamic of the war. We have to perform certain mission. We have to assess the enemy. We have to assess our own means. We have to find the center of gravity. We have to see who's our neighbor. Where is my plan B? Where I can run away? Who can support me? So this is the decision loop. The shorter the decision loop for the important operation, the bigger is our advantage over our enemy. But we have the telecommunication, but we also based on character, on the abilities, and it's an experience, because you cannot go over certain elements. It's a bit like in your life. You cannot have a simple man, a student, he cannot make it engineering student unless it happens. You cannot have a head of platoon who's the head of division in 2 years with all this machinery without having the know-how and without having the basis on the experience of his collaborators. We have this decision loop here. Command and making decisions is always a lonely business, and it's always a huge risk. Sometimes in business it is so that when you make a decision, I have a management board, I have the supervisory board, but the owner or the president makes a decision which also sometimes brings the company to bankruptcy. But in the combat situation, the commander is responsible, because he is responsible not before himself, before his superiors, but before the soldiers which go to war, which can die as a result of his wrong decision. We have plan, but no plan will survive meeting the enemy, which I've learned many times. E means MC square. Everything that is good must be understandable. Good leaders always make things simple. They always cut through disputes, debates, and make things simple. Here on this slide, I showed you an example of a simplest task that I got when I was the head of a division of helicopters. You can see those two. This blue point is a battle group, American strike for Polish strike group, which was ambushed, and I was at that time in my helicopter, and I had one squadron of Apaches from 11th wing of Apaches, and I got the shortest CG, the command, CG commanding class. Move your ass from here to here as soon as possible. It was not about my ass. It was about having helicopters there and devastated the guys who ambushed and who attacked our patrol. So that was the shortest battle command that I got it in the dynamics of war in a very simple way.
Operacja Babilon, którą
Operation Babylon that I showed you, it was one of the many operations
operacji, o których istnieją
about which not many people know. 1981, 16th of October, Shimon Peres, whom I mentioned, got an information
pod Bagdadem
that next to Baghdad, in Oshiriak,
wzbogacają
they are enriching uranium.
Irańczycy w czasie Saddam
And
Husseina.
Saddam Hussein was heading Iraq at that time, and soon
osiągną
they will be ready for building nuclear weapons. And he made a very risky decision that he sent 2 wings of F-15 and 16 to destroy that center,
Bez względu na
regardless of international consequences. That center was destroyed. The people who worked there, it was like late evening. Very few people died, but the center was destroyed, and the threat of nuclear war in the Middle East was pushed away. If Iraq would have nuclear war, I would not know. Don't know what would be the result for Iran, and is the only country who has nuclear weapons in the Middle East. So every leader has to make decisions, and sometimes these operations I'm talking about are not known they are classified and are unknown to the public. That's why quite often the authors want to get to the materials to be able to do out of it a story which should show the roots of evil. Search and night operations, these are examples of operations that our soldiers were carrying out in different places and in mechets, as in mosques. These were holy places because these were like holy places, sacred places. This was about faith. But what we found there, you can see it here, artillery, munition, explosives, which were hidden in those mosques. But you have to realize that if you get into trouble, you should not put the troubles on others. It's your problem then. This is the reality of battlefield. Here, a Black Hawk fell down. I mean, one of the engines turned off, and when we were going to one of my teams, I had to land, I would say, and in the enemy territory, because that was not the region which was very friendly to us. We had the Spanish PM and helped us with repairing the helicopter. Media and information, they have bigger strike force than one tank division. In terms of media, you can transfer everything. You can get we have very short attention span. Young people quite do not want to read something. For them, the important thing is the clip, is the strip, and the informational campaign. It can impact hearts and minds, but it can also disinformate. It can also fool people and dupe people. All this is to get the assumed effect. Media can also steer processes which are not good to you. So just like discrediting everything that is useful for making our operation, discrediting of political leaders and commanders, discreditation of populations, spreading false information. This all kills. The word kills because the word kills like a bullet, so we have to be very careful about that. The media, the use of media, the role of all leaders, the role of the political parties, the role of people who are responsible for shaping the reality is also using the media and to convince the society or organizations that what we do is right, or that what our organization does is right. You cannot be afraid of the screen, you cannot be afraid of the microphone. Of course, there are people who are not talented, or even though their knowledge is huge. However, you have to give the image of reality as much as possible. I was also I was giving interview for Al-Sharak News from the Gulf of the Persian Gulf. I've given this interview in March. The journalists asked, why does NATO and America and Ukraine is so aggressive towards Ukraine. I said, but I'm sorry, but is it the Russian column standing under Kiev or Ukrainian under Moscow? In Persian Gulf, they had this narrative that it's the European Union and the US were aggressive towards Russia, that they had to attack Ukraine. I mean, it's changing right now, but there's a lot of the capital influences the image of reality. This is the best known mosque for the Shiites. Imagine Karbala. When the Sunni have the Mecca and Medina, Shiites have Karbala, and then every year they have yes, you have pilgrimages from Shiites from all around the world. Al-Zarqawi's, which you can see that Al-Zarqawi's bandits were shooting at the police and the authorities, and Al-Zarqawi killed children. 30 girls who were going to school were killed by phosphorus ammunition. We were not allowed to use more than 200 meters force from closer than 200 meters from the sacred buildings. And I decided then that we will use a hellfire from Predator, 4,000 meters, and it hit this mortar and ammunition, causing destruction, causing the explosion. And it's also a risky ammunition. If the hellfire hit not this one, but hit this beautiful cupola, this beautiful dome, we will be the enemies of the whole Shiite population in the region, which would have horrible consequences. And such images, these are the images that show the reality of the battlefield. These were the images we saw after the terrorist attacks, Shiites against Sunnites, where Al-Zarqawi attacked his own brothers. They were in the middle of us, the American soldier. The child which is left orphaned lies in the hands of the soldier, and the soldier doesn't know what to do with it and with it. But we saw also such images, happiness in the face of people with whom we helped. Also, we have to remember about tolerance for other behaviors. Here you can see the Polish Afghan patrol. The famous Rosomak is standing there. 12 the people are praying to, soldiers are praying to Allah. Even though that they were tired, they wanted to end the patrol. It was both day and night, but they understood that other behaviors are also important and that the Afghan soldiers have the right to pray. Determination in action. This is not Apache. Sorry, it's not Black Hawk. It's an Apache. The pilot of this Apache was shot at from below, from an RPG. The operator who was sitting behind was wounded. This pilot landed next to a place where we had a hospital. He got out together with his operator, taking it like this. They got to the operation hall. He put it on the table, and then on the operation, and they took him on the table. They started to operate him, and then the nurse said, "It's good that you didn't operate yourself." You can see the determination of those people, of course, fighting for their lives, but also during the performance of military tasks. We also have to be effectively maximally engaged, and you have to show these things. Osama bin Laden, fortunately, but the media wrote a lot that it was a great success, that the biggest terrorist of the world was killed as a result of special operations by great American special forces, showing the realities of war, which I was the commander of some region. I saw only my part of the front. I saw Ahira, Karbala, Ivania, and Babylon. But the image of the whole operation is shown from media from different points, and only then we can see what is really happening there. which related to certain spectrum of activity in Iraq for the first 3 years of coalition. In every region, things were different. In the north and in the middle, there were like security. In the middle, counterinsurgency. We were stability, security, and support. But it wasn't like that because the battles were taking place everywhere. They fought everywhere, but that they showed that in a different way. In Kabul, in Afghanistan, see how this terrain is huge. This country is located in such a strange way. 75% are mountains, showing that in different places, from different perspectives, gives us full scope of activity. Kabul is 150% to. You have the highest mountains in the world, Hindu Kush. When there was an earthquake caused by the bomb, American bomb, because Americans they dropped a fuel bomb, air fuel bomb, at the foot of Hindu Kush because they wanted to kill Bin Laden in Tora Bora. And they called this a slight earthquake. We felt that in Kabul. But it's good that Hindu Kush did not fall down. Some geologists would say that they could have destroyed Hindu Kush. This is one of the beautiful palaces of Saddam Hussein. He had 17 such palaces, his sons too. People were starving, and he maintained palaces and residences at such a level. There was also zoo where he had lamparts, cheetahs and giraffes, etc. This is Babylon and archaeological stations. We were also protecting that. I was a commander there, then I transferred the command to the Ministry of to the Ministry of Culture of Iraq. This is a famous Ishtar gate. Do you know where the origin is? In Berlin. The Germans stole it. Why Germans? It wasn't a German option, but von Moltke was the advisor of Sultan Abdullah II during the Ottoman Empire, and he was in Babylon, and then he asked the government of Babylon of Ottoman Empire to give him the gate. That was the palace where the chemical weapons were supposed to be hidden, but they weren't there. I will not talk to you about strategies about the nuclear weapons. I talked about it. Iskanders, for example, they have like 400 kilometers. If they had nuclear warheads, and because they had, from Kaliningrad they could go to Brussels. Right now they say that they have placed 3 batteries at the territory of Belarus. Nuclear strategy of the United States assumes the use of operational procedures. Short about procedures, as you have noted, the president of the United States is followed by a guy in a uniform with two bags. He's a colonel. He's trained in using this black suitcase. Regardless of where he is, or United States, on Miami, whether he's on Air Force One Boeing, he's always accompanied by this guy. And in case getting a signal about a nuclear attack on the territory of the United States, his National Center for Steering ballistic missiles informs him immediately. At this very moment, the guy opens this black suitcase, checks the codes, breaks the seal. The president presses the button which he has always in his pocket, that this is him. Have you seen in the film that he puts the finger, the eye, etc. They confirm on the other side in Washington that this is president of the United States. This guy he connects with Washington or with Pentagon. He gets the information what sort of attack it is, and then the president chooses an option of response.
Więc mamy tak, prezydenta,
So the president,
walizka,
the suitcase,
wykonanie łączności, weryfikacja,
verification and connection of verification of codes, selection of the shape of attack. The president responds and sends to National Military Command Center, where they have 20 on-duty officers or head of combined headquarters. They never fly together,
i wtedy wybiera
and then he
opcję
chooses the option of
albo
attack.
zeskierują
Yeah,
się
they either
po prostu
shoot rockets from silos, from submarines or aircrafts. There are two officers in the center of command.
mogli nawzajem sobie przeszkadzać.
In a,
Po przekręceniu tych kluczyków,
after turning the and they turn the keys, and one of those objects are then being lost. That's the procedure. This command can be blocked if the head of or secretary of defense finds that something is wrong. And what it can be, this instability of the president of the United States, that was during the President President Nixon's reign, because he was a schizophrenic, and it was very close to Trump when he said that he will burn North Korea.
gra zespołowa. Fajnie pokazywać właśnie w filmach
Teamwork.
i
It's great to show in the movies and watch it very well such a teamwork, like landing of paratroopers, cooperation between types of weapons, but they have to be. He's a paratrooper who prepares himself for military action. Development of military capabilities. It's a very important a thing that requires technology and money and training. And quite often this is shown in a distorted mirror, because people do not understand, or maybe do understand, maybe they think that commanders waste money when it comes to modernization of the armed forces. Unfortunately, security costs money.
takich właśnie fajnych rzeczy do prowadzenia działań bojowych. To jest pies. To nie jest osioł.
This is the dog
Państwa wyszkolony do
trained
wykrywania ładunków wybuchowych.
for finding IEDs. It cannot. We've trained such dogs too. I have this is a military dog, and these dogs are incredibly. They're invaluable. The sniper, I already mentioned about that movie. These are elements of singular individual training. That's what I mentioned, the Headlocker, a film about sappers. These are the IEDs we found. These are the IEDs we had to diffuse. They could kill many people, but they also killed sappers. They were detonated in various ways. What is difficult to show and difficult to which are not seen. These are the tons of ammunition which we found after we defeated Saddam Hussein. In combat reality, you cannot show that, and this is the everyday reality. Look how many operations were performed. They have different kryptonies, and those were during my term, which was less than a year. Precision ammunition. It looks good in the movies, but it's huge risk too. What I said about Karbala. Here we found Al-Sadris. We had to eliminate them from the fight, but save and secure the population. So it was a laser-guided bomb which got into the building, it got through the whole building and exploded, killing everybody inside. But the sides of the building stayed. That's the technology. And of course, we found also such things. This is pure heroin. Marszałek Terlecki would know more about it. And of course, incredible amounts of guns. Building alliances and interpersonal relations in all activities, in operation, in all situations. This results later this impacts this is General Martins, who was the Secretary of Defense in with Trump, and he was in Iraq. He helped our soldiers a lot. As the commander of the operations, he designated a bit of his reconnaissance, his UAVs, and I give him medal for his service for the Polish military forces, which is quite a high distinction for a general of a foreign army. We're talking a lot about critical infrastructure. In this map, you can see how much infrastructure is lying on the bottom of the seas. Energy cables, optic fiber cables. So it's very important to protect critical infrastructure today. Is one of the tasks, because we work in such a domain like cyber security. But we also have submarine domain. The tasks of the submarines is to monitor the critical infrastructure and preventing acts of destruction. We have to be, of course, not always works fine, so we have to have a humility. Do not lose your way, regardless of all, and you always go in the right direction, which Sławek knows very well, and Joasia here too. Our kids are always swimming in the right direction, and we always should enjoy life as long as it lasts. A very important thing is negotiation, even at home. When you go home, get back home in the morning. You have to negotiate, even with your wife. You cannot be afraid of negotiating. A friend of mine said, I was at Mietek's playing cards. She called Mietek and said, was your husband with you? She said, yes, he's still here. Ladies and gentlemen, future environment, security environment, what it's gonna use like? The world is multicentric. We know we don't have an agreed vision of threats. There are changes in the global spheres of influence, erosion of national identity. Of course, those engines are both threats and opportunities. Global areas of I lived in Istanbul, in London. I mean, there are like big cities, over 20 million people. Things were horrible. I mean, a lot of threats, sometimes lack of water, lack of electricity. Keeping that infrastructure is a huge challenge, and the challenge will grow. Internal wars, clashes of religions, cultures, and societies. Paul Huntington, it's still current. Culture, religion, and societies. Climatic wars, innovation, technological innovations. Who would talk about nanotechnology several years ago? We have artificial intelligence. We have to know how to use that for our own good, not for destruction, not for wars. And these topics are worth undertaking in your artistic work. Change energy changes globalization of financial means and race for resources. So it will be complex, unsure, but technology and human innovativeness will allow us to use that chance. And despite all those difficulties, please try to keep balance. Thank you. And at the end of the day, I will show you one more film, if I can. Something to entertain you. A jump from 5,000 meters from a Skyvan with soldiers with special forces of Formosa Grom. The one in the blue uniform is me. The task is to hold our hands together to make a figure, make 360, to make a circle, you'll see in a while, and open 360 kilometers per hour, 1 second, 70 meters lower. Yeah. Turn, the cameraman is also one of us. Another turn. One is
Ten na czarno to są te właśnie siły specjalne. Gdzieś tak 3600 gdzieś tak.
3,600.
I otwarcie spada woli. Widzicie,
And
ta
open.
żółtka taka czarna
Yes, you can
wola?
see this small black. Oh, yeah, the ropes. Yes, we put things in order and then we land. You can see the landing ground below. Yeah,
Trochę większa od kajta.
it's a small piece of cloth, a bit bigger than a kite, and this is what it looks like. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be grateful if you ask me questions. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję. Tak jest.
Ile czasu zajmuje przelot
How much does a missile need to get to Warsaw from Kaliningrad, and do we have an effective system, a counter system? What is the time to make a decision? 6 minutes. Every start of a missile is monitored from the orbit. Of course, then NATO surveillance and American surveillance, especially now, monitors all the system of launching missiles, especially missiles of tactical and operational range. Do we have a system? It's not ours. We have 3 Patriot batteries, one in the northeast and one in the southeast, and we'll have our own 3 batteries. But it is of course dangerous because especially the Kryłajete, the K missiles, they're maneuvering. They're not coming only from the east. They can go, for example, along the Baltic coast and attack us from the west. But the longer they get, the better is the time to discover and these missiles. Quite often people say in general, you know what is the difference between general and the captain? The general. I wanted to give you a. Sorry, that was a joke. Sorry. Thank you. When I meet various people who look great, just like leaders, and it's shown. I remember there was a movie which it was called Patton. Who of you have seen that film? When he gets up, this scene when he walks, Patton, apart from the fact that he was a very charismatic, he was a great leader, he had great ideas, he had a very high squeaky voice. That was his curse. But whenever he spoke somewhere, it was always difficult. And I told about him. When I watch you, I know why the world is faster than light, because when I see you, we're thrilled by you. But when you open your mouth, it's the end of the world. Okay, thank you very much. I have a simple question. Which Polish movie is realistic and because you talk a lot about Karbala. I watched Karbala. I must say that it did not convince me. Yes, because the guys in Ray-Bans, the director who's there, they're showing me there. That wasn't convincing. But together, I spoke with Sławek several years ago. You remember in Hell? We were thinking if we shouldn't do such a movie. I couldn't talk about such things, and we would do it differently. I was a reviewer, or maybe an advisor for the film The Demons of War of Pasikowski, and it is quite realistic. There is also this moral dilemma, this axiom, refusing to follow orders. You know, slightly for the public, but I was in Bosnia and Herzegovina, during that war, and make some elements more realistic. For example, when this helicopter is lying in the river, it was a pilot from my 25th Cavalry Division. We gave our extras here, and when he's lying there, dead in the cabin, he was flying. He was flying on later. He got a nickname, a dead man. I want to ask one more question. I don't know if it's the right moment, but it's a. How do you think this conflict will evolve? In reality, if I knew, I would get the Nobel Peace Prize. But unfortunately, I must say that it will take. It will certainly be long. Apart from all what I said here, we do not take slightly Putin and Russian Federation. They will get their shit together over the 3-4 months. Out of the mobilized, let's say they would train more or less 200,000. They would want to keep what they have. They will not use tactical nuclear weapons. They have the possibility, but there's little probability of that. But they will be trying to supplement the losses they have. The General Surovnikov, apart from his dark past, he's not a bad commander, and he would want to try to use the aircrafts, the air force. He will want to use the air force during the deepening of the defense and tormenting the Ukrainians. But I don't know if they will have a force to attack that to regain the territories that they lost right now. And the general goal is not to get to Kiev. They want to keep what they have along the Dnieper River and sanctioning what they said, what they stole. Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. They're close to losing Kherson because right now this Russian contingent is pushed to Nova Kakhovka south of Kherson. If they get encircled, there will be about 30,000 soldiers, like 30,000. They will take them. If they, yeah, so they. Yeah, so it's one of the goals. Nobody talks, but it will be until it will take time until spring. But some people say that it has to be finished somehow with the peace talks and having the agreement. But it will only depend on Ukraine and Zelensky because the Ukraine lost too much to agree today that okay, you stay where you are. Before the 24th, I sanctioned this because such proposals were said at the table. We'll leave you that Donetsk and Lugansk. Let's not talk about Crimea, and you're moving out of our territory. There are proposals like this, but how it's gonna work, nobody knows. But Ukraine is not supported, not with a like stream of modern army, but remember that they are fighting for the 7th month. They're paying, like, administration works there, but everything works. But in the industry works. But the winter is coming. But what do they have to say? I mean, they wouldn't be able to function without 1.5 billion dollars or euro per month, and as long as the West will be supporting them, so long they will be able to fight. They're fighting for us. Just imagine what would happen if after the 24th, this idea of Putin, this taking over Kiev, creating this the dissolution of the Ukrainian army, and if it would take place, where would be the the Russian army be? With Brest, in Lviv, in Yavorov, we would have a very long border with the Russian Federation, because Belarus is in fact a part of the Russian Federation when it comes to military forces. When it comes to administration and economy, they're also subordinate to Russia because they can't function alone. For us, it's good if it's as it is today, and let it be as long as possible for the Ukraine to fight and regain as much territory as possible. Realistically, I think that it will get to Lugansk and Donetsk and will go over Dnieper before the winter starts, and then everything will get everything stalled. It will be difficult for Russia, and that's good because they're far away from the logistic bases, far away from the logistic centers. Just imagine 300,000 people in trenches without hot food, without warm clothes, without everyday support, sleeping in the barracks, in the tents, or in military. Well, the Ukrainians are in their territory. It's going to be difficult for them, but they will always have support of the nation. They will be able to be replaced because today about 300,000 soldiers are being trained, prepared to enter the battle. So they will take over from the because you can't be on the front forever. This is how I see it. Thanks.